This is a BAE Systems Australia podcast. Welcome to Beneath the Deck, a podcast series that tells the stories of the people behind some of Australia's largest shipbuilding and sustainment programs.
Growing up wanting to build houses and ending up building the ships for Australia's largest ever warship program is arguably not your normal career path. G'day, I'm Drew Radford, and you could say that about much of the career path of my next guest on Beneath the Deck. Ed is Marine Systems Engineering Manager. He's helping deliver the enormous Hunter Class Frigate Program, but his involvement with it began on the other side of the world, years before the contract was even awarded. It's a unique from the keel up kind of story. And to delve into it further, Ed joins me for this episode. Thanks for your time.
Not at all.
Ed, you're an engineer by trade. Is that, when you're a young lad, is that what you envisaged yourself doing?
Not really. No, growing up I always wanted to be a builder. I wanted to build houses and wanted to leave school and do an apprenticeship. And my parents managed to talk me into sticking it out and going through university, and that's how I got on the pathway to engineering.
It's a funny one though, because you are now arguably building some of the biggest things that ever been built in this country.
Yeah, I even at university I didn't even know that we built ships in this country, and so getting involved, in that at such an early age in my career, I think has been pretty fascinating and just incredible to work on and contribute to, these massive projects.
Well, what is the massive project that you are working on?
So the Hunter Class Frigate Program is a program to design and build 6 ships for the Royal Australian Navy, but it's probably a bit more than that in terms of the requirements that we've got under the contract to develop Australian industry and develop capability, particularly in the engineering world as well. So it's pretty fascinating to do more than just build the ships, because that's a pretty big challenge in itself.
Yeah, I reckon that's a bit of an understatement, really. But your role as a mechanical engineer in there, what you say, marine systems engineer, what does that actually do?
So I manage the teams that do the system design for the HVAC system, the electrical system, all of the auxiliary systems, and the main power and propulsion systems. So we're taking the parent program, the Type 26 program in the UK, and we're Australianising it, we're implementing changes, we're designing in the sort of mechanical elements of the new combat systems and preparing it for build here in our yard in Osborne.
That sounds like a remarkably broad scope of responsibility. Yeah. You said, HVAC system, you said propulsion system. I can only begin to imagine the number of people you must be dealing with.
Yeah, it's quite dynamic is probably the way to put it. Lots of bouncing around between various different problems that pop up in all the areas amongst the project. But that's what makes it interesting, I think, is just dealing with a whole bunch of different people that know a lot about really specific things and being able to learn from them and work with them and solve problems with them. That's where I find the enjoyment in the work.
You said there you're constantly learning, but you're also kind of ringmaster, for want of a better description. I can only begin to imagine the logistics you're trying to juggle.
Yeah, there's a lot of requirement to speak with a whole bunch of different people, and sometimes you don't speak to people for a few weeks, but need to get back in touch with them and pick up where you left off. Sometimes it's hard to remember where it was that you left off, just with the number of plates that need to be spinning at any given time. Someone will turn up to talk to you and you have to really think hard about what it is you were talking to them about last time you spoke. It's just a big volume of things happening all at once.
A big volume, but I get the very clear impression that central to what you're doing is communication. I know you're obviously, for want of a better description, a numbers man, a maths guy by training, but it's a real comms coordination role.
Yeah, the stakeholder management piece in my role, but also in the role of all the engineers on the project is really important. There's all this old jokes about engineers not necessarily being people, but we really have to be in this kind of project, because if everybody's just off doing their own little thing, head down, bum up, engineering away, then it never comes together and we never get a product out of the end of it. It requires just an incredible amount of coordination. And so we really do need to be, really good collaborators to be successful.
Is that something you wish others in the organisation know about you and what your team do?
I think so, because there's probably a perception around the project, and particularly I think it's probably common on big projects like this that, everybody's quite siloed and everything happens in all these little islands. But I mean, the reality is that the team are out there every day talking to everybody, coordinating things, pulling all the inputs together that they need to do their job and creating the outputs for other parts of the business. We really do have to work for a team, otherwise the whole thing just stops.
When you ended up doing your engineering degree, did you have any idea what you were going to do off the back of that? Were ships on your horizon?
It wasn't. And I always said to my now wife, as long as I'm not designing air conditioners, and I thought, I want to be doing something that's boring. I want to do something that matters. And short of joining a Formula One team or, something like that, I think I've managed to succeed in that. I think the irony is that a big part of my scope is the air conditioning system on the ship. So it's kind of gone full circle, but it's in such a much more interesting environment, put it that way.
Well, it is interesting. I understand one of your earlier projects, when you were working in Sydney, involved launching the first ever drones from our Navy ships.
Yeah, that was fascinating. We put a Scan Eagle, which is a fixed-wing unmanned aerial system, on the FFG class. So, that was a really rewarding time to succeed in, putting that capability on in such a short period of time.
You mentioned earlier on that you were involved with the Hunter Class Frigate Program right from the beginning. And I understand that involved going to Scotland before Australia even had made the decision to build these things.
Yeah, that's right. So I guess it was around 2016, I started asking around, whether there was any opportunities to go and live and work overseas. Alice and I were quite young. We wanted to get out and about and came across the Type 26 program. And I'd made a few inquiries to go and potentially work on that program in the UK. And then this was C5000 at the time popped up. And so the opportunity came up to work on the actual competitive tender for the project, and managed to secure out of that a secondment to the UK, which initially was only intended to last a relatively short period of time, do the bid, submit the bid, and then come back home. And then when we actually won the contract in 2018 and it all started, that's when I stayed on for about another 2 and a bit years until COVID hit. So I spent a good sort of 3.5 years in Glasgow right through the early phases of the project.
That's quite phenomenal. So you literally understand this from the ground up.
Understand's a strong word. I mean, there's so much to be understood. I don't think I've got it all, but at least I know the people that were around, so I know who to ask if I've ever got any questions.
Well, from the keel up may be a better description, but as part of that, you built your own team in the UK, and you've also done the same in this role. I get the impression that building these teams is very satisfying for you. Why is that?
I can't really put my finger on it, but I think broadly on Hunter, the team that we work with is excellent. And I'm quite lucky to work with a fantastic team, just sort of locally within the engineering world. But then to be involved and have that experience of basically picking a team, recruiting a team, building a team, going through all the early phases of team development and all that sort of stuff. Like, it's challenging, but I find it really rewarding, because when a group of people that you've assembled get together and really get firing on all cylinders, it's really, really satisfying.
I could only begin to imagine how satisfying that is, and that's enabling people to take responsibility and do their job rather than look over their shoulders, I would imagine.
That's it, yeah. So get people set up, give them the tools that they need, get the knowledge in their head that they need to do their job, and then leverage whatever other skills and experience they've brought from their past lives and their background. And, it's a bit of a multiplier, that kind of effect. When you bring the right group of people together, you sort of surprise yourself sometimes with how successful they can be.
Ed, you were right there at the beginning of the tender process, one of 3 different groups around the world tendering for the project. And now, 7, 8 years later, you've just cut the steel for the first frigate. How do you reflect upon the program and how the shipyards have progressed since those early days?
It's hard to believe sometimes, because it's been such a long period of time since those days back in 2016, 2017, but it doesn't feel like it. It's just really flown by. And I think the other part of it, more recently, particularly in the engineering domain, is that the ships there being built now. It's real. So back in the early days, we skimmed over things quite broadly and, perhaps said we'll come and finish that later. Well, that later is now, and we've got to get things done so that it can get built.
Imagine the scale out at Osborne has increased dramatically. I understand you even went out there and had a look when you were on holiday before any of this was happening by a long shot, so it must be huge compared to then.
Yeah, I came on a holiday 2014, I think, when the AWD build was underway, and thought, gee, this is pretty cool. There's a whole shipyard here. They build ships here. And it's hard to correlate what it looked like then with what it looks like now in terms of the size and scale just of the shipyard, let alone, the product that we're going to produce here.
The numbers of people involved as well, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think we're well over 1,000 now, which is just a crazy large number of people. I remember when the shipyard was being built, we couldn't believe the size of the canteen, just how big it was. We thought, we're never going to be able to fill this thing. And now it's probably not big enough to just support the volume of people that work here now.
Wow. It's an interesting benchmark, isn't it? Just feeding people.
Yeah.
What do you think's fundamentally changed about your work from that time in Scotland to now? You sort of alluded to it, I guess, in terms of, we got to deliver.
For me personally, I guess just the nature of my roles changed a little bit as well. So I've got to be a bit more strategic in terms of how the team are enabled to get the work done. And really, we're moving into the next phase of the program now. So looking forward and making sure we understand what work we have coming up in the future and that we're enabled and prepared to do that kind of next phase. The focus really lately has been deliver the design, and the focus will soon transition into support production to build the design. That's quite an exciting shift in the program, but it's something that requires, a fair bit of careful thought and attention.
And in terms of the scope of your responsibility, you said earlier on about building engineering capability, and I'm guessing that means well beyond the boundaries of the shipyard, that there are firms in Australia that contribute to this and our overall sovereign capability.
Yeah, we do work relatively closely with a bunch of people and different companies to kind of complement the skills mix that we've got within BAE Systems. Sometimes it's not logical for us to do everything ourselves because either we only need a very small amount of that skill, or we need so much of it that it's untenable for us to hold such a big team inside the BAE organisation. So a big part of what we do is partner with other organisations to design products that we use on the ship and provide specialist skills and experience and that sort of stuff as well.
Now, in terms of your career, I'm just curious about a few things. You've done some remarkable projects. What do you reckon your biggest career highlight's been so far, or is it now?
Oh, it's hard to reflect on things that are happening right now because it's all just so chaotic. I think it'll be a real triumph when we depart for the first sort of sea trials or during the acceptance process or the delivery voyage for the ship. I'm looking forward to that day, although it's far off into the future. I think one of the more rewarding parts of my career to date has just been the success of the Hunter tender. We put in just this incredible amount of work to put the bid together, and a relatively small group of people worked incredibly hard to pull the detail together there, and it was pretty tough at times, pretty frustrating. The experience is just generally pretty hard yakka. But then the joy that you get out of the news story breaking that we were successful. I still remember really well where I was, what I was doing when I flicked up the news on my phone and hit refresh, and then there it was on the homepage of the ABC, and thought, wow, we actually did it. The effort was then all worth it, and the reward was just so enormous.
I was actually going to ask about that moment of finding out. Must have been kind of out of this world after that amount of work.
Yeah, it was a little bit unusual. I was actually in Sydney at the time visiting my parents, and most of the project was over in the UK at that point. And so I sort of missed out on all the celebrations, but still got to share in the overall success and the stuff that came out of that. But yeah, I was in Australia at the time and missed out on a bit of the celebration.
Was there ever any question in your mind that, we've got the tender, I'm going to work on this now, or I hope to work on this, or was that like, we've got it, I want to work on it now?
I don't really think I ever thought beyond that immediate goal. What happened beyond the tender? Well, if we won, then I knew I'd have a job somewhere, somehow. If we lost, I never really thought what life would be like beyond that. And then when we were successful, it was, after the initial sort of celebration and recovery, it was just go, go, go. We were just straight into it. There was no looking back at that point. We were just straight into it.
Your career has certainly evolved from, you mentioned at the start, doing technical drawings to what you're doing now. What do you reckon the biggest challenges you faced in your career, and how did you overcome it?
I think one of the singular biggest challenges I've had was a really, really difficult day on Garden Island, and I found myself in this situation on the dockside with a ship that was really quite actively preparing to deploy, and I was down at the island before the sun came up. It was just really, really stressful. And, on reflection, I just didn't ask for the help that I needed to do that properly. I thought I could do it myself, alone. And I think we got there in the end, but I remember coming home that day just spent. I basically just went straight to bed. I was completely spent. And that was probably one of the more identifiable, difficult days with, something that I can identify as being the cause of that.
It sounded like you took away a pretty important lesson, though, that you couldn't do everything yourself.
Yeah, I think I was quite naive early on and thought I could, take over the world. And I was quite lucky, I think, to have a good group of people involved and working with me and mentoring me and, managing me that kept nudging me and saying, hey, it looks like you can do this, but it's probably you'll get a better result if you're more collaborative and if you work with other people and if you ask for help when you genuinely need it. And that was really good advice. And it's still really relevant to this day.
It sounds like it's quite fundamental to what's helped you be successful at your job.
Well, yeah, a big part of it. I mean, there's absolutely no way that one single person can do all the engineering on the ship. So leveraging the power of a team and, the other stakeholders that we've got around the project, it's necessary for success.
Ed, I want to talk to you briefly about your involvement in the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Group. Why is this so important to you?
I got started when I returned back to Australia. I think someone sent an email out saying, hey, we want to form a group to do this kind of stuff. And I thought, yeah, that sounds interesting. I'll get involved in that. I think a focus on the diversity or the inclusivity and the equity amongst our teams is a bit of a success multiplier. And then from there, the group's grown and we've helped contribute to the broader DEI strategy of the Australian business and, done a whole bunch of cool stuff.
Why do you call it a success multiplier?
I think when people feel happy and safe in their work, they do better work. And I think when we can leverage the kind of diverse experience and backgrounds and life experience of different people, we get new perspectives and we can solve problems in new ways. And particularly in engineering, there's an element of creativity that's required. So bringing in a more diverse group of people to solve those problems, it's much more likely that we're going to get a better outcome.
Ed, what do you like about working within Defence and BAE?
I think it's the projects that we get to do. I think the product that we're designing and building is fascinating and it's incredible and it's complex and it's all very interesting work. But it has a real purpose as well. That the product you've designed or the ship that we've built or the various different bits of input that you've provided are actually going to be used for the greater good of our nation. And it's hard to know what that looks like because you never know what's going to happen over the sort of 30-odd year life of the ship. But just know that it's going to be a useful tool for the Royal Australian Navy and the Australian government that you've put so much heart and soul into. That's what kind of drew me into BAE in the first place is just the nature of the work that we do.
Ed, your job sounds all-consuming to say the least, and yet in your downtime, you're renovating a 140-year-old house. Again, pretty consuming. But I understand BAE helps in terms of the work-life balance you have.
Yeah, we've got, the last couple of years, we've been working what we call a 9-day fortnight. And so we condense a few extra hours throughout the rest of the week, and every second Friday we get a rostered day off. And it's the best thing since sliced bread. Honestly, having a day every fortnight just to do whatever you need to do when all the shops are open helps as well in Adelaide. And just catch up on life. Gives time to do projects at home and all that sort of stuff, but also just gives a real bit of time away from work, let the mind rest and let your mind recover from the chaos that it is sometimes.
I find it generally fascinating too that somebody at your level enjoys a 9-day fortnight. I would have thought the further up the chain you go, the closer you get to a 13-day fortnight.
No, it's right the way through the organisation. And that, I think, is pretty representative of the focus in the organisation just on that work-life balance. It's a marathon, not a sprint. to get these ships out the door. So if we burn ourselves out, it's just to the detriment of the overall project. So we really do need to look after ourselves and take rest when we think we need it, which this, kind of forces in a way. It's excellent.
Lastly, Ed, what advice would you have for anyone considering a career in defence or with BAE?
I think just give it a crack. There's so much variety in the industry. There's so much different work that we can get involved in. There's so many different projects. One of the great things about BAE is just the size and shape of the organisation and the internal mobility. And so you never really know until you try. It's just get in there and have a crack.
Well, Ed, you certainly have given it a crack and you continue to do so. Thanks so much for giving us some insight to your unique career on this Beneath the Deck podcast.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening. For more episodes, find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or visit the BAE Systems Australia website. All information is accurate at the time of release.